You know, Mr. President, members, our caucus provided a number of opportunities to make this bill better, to use some of the money that those 1,000 or so millionaire families are going to get in their estates and move it to the working family credit for just regular working Minnesotans, to move some of that money to property tax relief and provide school districts with aid for safe schools. And your caucus has decided to reject that. So we were denied the opportunity to make the bill better. And so I think it's going to be very hard for you to expect us, when we didn't get to participate, that you're going to be able to get our support. But as I was sitting here today, I was kind of looking around the chamber and actually looking at who's here, and something kind of stunning came across me. I was thinking there must be a song, because I was thinking in my head, here we go again. And I was looking around the chamber. There are 6 people in this chamber that were in the legislature when I came in. And one came in with me. He sits right behind me. 7 of us. In my first 7 years, we cut taxes and spent every single year. And it seemed like the money was never going to quit coming in. And by the time 2003 came around, and we were in that depth of that recession, we were facing a deficit. And I sat here for more than a decade trying to figure out some path to get Minnesota's fiscal stability back on the tracks. And in 2012, when the majority flipped here and I took the chair that Senator Gazelka has today, we owed our schools over $1 billion. And we had a significant deficit of over $1 billion to face. And I made a decision that I was tired of the easy votes. And members, you're never going to find an easier vote than voting green on this one. I took those votes my first 7 years. They were really easy votes. And they're things that people like. When you spend money or promise them a tax cut, people get excited. You can see that out in Washington, D.C. It doesn't matter who's in charge, Democrats, Republicans, running an additional $1 trillion deficit every single year now going forward. Washington, D.C., and I'm too old so I won't be here, is going to drive our country into insolvency. And the only thing that's going to save us here in Minnesota, and maybe save most states, is we have to have a balanced budget. So we'll come back here next year and maybe we'll borrow from our schools again in order to cobble together a budget. There probably won't be enough money to do the things we all even agree on. You know, when in 2012, after that election, I told you what the economic situation of the state was, and Governor Dayton and I and Representative Thiessen decided that we were going to raise taxes on the top 2% of wage earners in this state, and we were going to fix the state's structural budget problems. And we did that. And the person that sat in this chair right here got up and cried that you are going to kill Minnesota's economic recovery. Minnesota's economy is going to plunge into negative GDP growth if you raise the taxes on these top 2% of Minnesotans. But we did it anyway, because what I have learned over time about cutting taxes is there is no evidence, none, that cutting taxes will stimulate economic growth. And if anybody wants to look at the most recent example, take a look at what happened in Kansas. They're even writing books about it. because after the 2010 election, the governor and the Republican legislature went on a tax-cutting spree, and the state almost collapsed. And the Republicans that were elected in 2010 in Kansas, most of them faced primaries, and those very, very conservative Tea Party Republicans who were swept in 2010 were swept out by their own party because it just didn't work. It didn't stimulate any economic growth, and they were forced to make cuts in areas that did create economic growth for the state. You know, if taxes were the defining issue that businesses care about, and I am proud of Minnesota's Fortune 500 companies. I've had the privilege to meet with many of the CEOs and talk with them. I actually have the cell phone numbers of a number of those CEOs on my phone. And I'm very proud of those companies that are housed here. And we do have relatively high taxes compared to most states. But just tell me why. Why haven't they moved to South Dakota? There's no corporate income taxes at all. There's no income taxes for individuals. The CEOs wouldn't pay a dime. Why haven't they fled there? But they're staying here because this is a very prosperous state where they have become very, very successful. And we have become successful because two reasons. We have an incredible workforce that this legislature for decades has invested in. And we have a quality of life that is second to almost none, that this legislature also has spent significant resources on. So I'm just very, very concerned, you know, when I changed chairs from Senator Gazelka's to over here, I looked at the November 2016. Instead of having over $1 billion deficit like I inherited when I became the leader, you guys had a $1.4 billion surplus. And under Governor Dayton's leadership, and to some extent mine, the budget reserve up to $1.9 billion under Democratic leadership in Minnesota. And now, where are we going? I look at this spreadsheet, and numbers matter. And it shows that when we come back here next year, we've got a $45 billion budget, roughly, for a biennium. We're going to have $36 million left on the bottom line. And let's all just pray that holds. We have spent the last 2 years the entire $1.4 billion that I took really tough votes, and many people in this room took really tough votes to accumulate that. Because if there is something I have learned around here over the years, it's that building surpluses is really hard work, and it takes a lot of courage. But spending money, like we're going to do here today, that's really easy, and you see it every day out in Washington, D.C. But next year, there's going to be another legislature. I think all of us will be here. Most of us, I hope. One less, maybe. But next year we're going to come back here, and we don't know what the priorities are going to be next year. And I think we have a responsibility to that next legislature, us and a new House, to make sure that they don't immediately have to manage a crisis. Because I think when we left here this time last year, we didn't know that the big issues of this session was going to be opioids. We didn't know that the big issue of this session was going to be elder abuse. Both take money, take serious money. We didn't know that the big issue of this session was going to be safe schools and how to try and make them safer. We didn't know that a year ago. And we don't know what this time next year, when the next legislature comes back here, what the priorities are going to be. And having been here long enough to have gone through more than a decade of not having money for things that we all knew were important. And early childhood is the first one that comes to mind to me. Because when I first came to the legislature, we didn't even have a committee. We didn't have a line item on the spreadsheet about early childhood. And guess what? The University of Minnesota came out with these studies about the incredible brain development that happens in those first 3 years of life, and how the brain is like a sponge in those early years. And if you stimulate it, it will grow exponentially. And by the time they're teenagers, you all know they already know everything. So it's too late. So you have to do it when they're really young. And we learned that from the work that came out of the University of Minnesota. And guess what? This legislature sat on their hands and didn't do a dang thing about it because we had no money. We all agreed it was important, but we went through a decade, created a committee, tried to cobble together some nickels we didn't have, borrowed from our K-12 schools, but couldn't do things we even, all of us, agreed were important. So I'm just very, very worried as we move forward. You know, a big tax bill last year, another one this year, $170-some million we're going to spend next year here, $100 million more in the next biennium. The money will quit flowing in. All of this in a period of positive GDP growth. Our economy is growing at right about 2% a year, a little more. That is not going to happen indefinitely. This economy will slow down, and with it, the revenue that comes to us. And we are leaving the next legislature way too thin a margin here. So if we're going to spend it, and you seem determined to spend it, I was hoping we could spend it on working families or spend it on schools, but instead we're going to spend it on those 1,000 millionaire families. We're going to spend it on big corporations that are bringing money back from offshore and spend it on them. And I just think it's a missed opportunity and misplaced priorities. And so it's an easy vote. It's a really easy yes vote. But I can tell you what, we're going to get back here next year, and I'll bet you the votes are going to get tougher. They're going to get tougher when you're the ones that have to take the vote to start borrowing from schools again, or different kinds, maybe enhance the June accelerated sales tax in this bill, somehow find some accounting gimmicks or budget gimmicks to try and cobble together a few nickels to address what the priorities of next year are going to be. Because we came in here a year ago with a $1.4 billion surplus. And we're going home, closing out this session with $36 million left. We have spent it all. It does feel a little bit like Washington, D.C., because spending is easy. You see it out there. You don't have to watch the news every day. And I got to tell you, we're starting to act a little bit like that you just can't spend enough. And someday there's not going to be money to spend, and unlike the federal government, we won't be able to address the things that are priorities for our business community, for our citizens, for our children, and we will have done it. And somewhere, someday, some leader's going to come along, I'll be gone, that'll have the courage to upright the boat again and take the really tough votes that it takes to hand off a $1.4 billion surplus to their successor. So, members, 34, you're going to take the easy green vote today, pretty easy. Mine's going to be red, because I got 7 grandkids. And I know what's going to make a difference in their lives. And it's not going to be cutting taxes for millionaire families after they die. And it's not going to be cutting taxes for big corporations that want to earn money offshore and want to bring it back here. That's not the future I want for my grandchildren. I want money for our schools and for early childhood and money for working families so that they can have the kind of quality life that I had growing up. And this bill is a tremendous missed opportunity, spends too much money. Please vote red.
Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President and members.